greeting I heard every day when I lived in Japan. Never, good morning, or Mr. Foreigner. It was, hello, hello, hello. I shouldn't have expected anything different after 2 years. As you in the audience have no doubt noticed, I am a white boy. In Japan, where over 120 of its 128 million people are Japanese, this meant I stood out. Walking to the supermarket, hello! Trying to hide in the corner of a restaurant, hello! Some of the times, these simple greetings were an honest attempt at communication, but more often than not, they served as reminders to me that no matter how much time I spent in the country, how much I learned of the language, I would never belong. I wasn't resentful of it. I was just a little sad that this place I would have liked to call home would never think of me as an equal. Even years after I had left this home, I found myself called back in the wake of March 11th. One of the things you probably couldn't imagine from the video captured on every cell phone, every camera in the affected area is the smell. The stench of dead fish was omnipresent, with the supplies of packing plants and boat cargo all washed ashore in the wake of a 10-meter tsunami. Instead of distributing fresh seafood across Japan, as was the original intent, that day's catch found itself scattered across most of the eastern shore. All morning, I've been working on getting floorboards removed from a traditional Japanese house, sliding doors, soft tatami flooring. But whatever sense of warmth and security this house may have provided in the past, it seemed almost every board we violently dislodged from the structure revealed something new. An unopened bottle of green tea, an envelope with 5,000 yen, photographs of different families, more dead fish. The owner, Kono-san, a man in his late 40s who is clearly no stranger to physical labor, had been rather fortunate when the tsunami struck, as his house was relatively far from the coast and only hit by 2 meters of water. 2 meters. When it finally receded, debris and mud found its way into the open-air foundation of his house, and most of the wood on the first floor was a lost cause. In fact, nearly everything in Ofunato was a lost cause, within half a kilometer of the shore. I'm sure you've seen the pictures. Houses completely washed away to find themselves intact, but in a different town, or more likely torn to pieces. Fishing boats that had settled on top of 3-story buildings when the water finally withdrew. I had a whole day to do nothing but scout out the damage to one tiny town, and I barely scratched the surface. What stuck out most was a street sign, overturned and obviously displaced, stating, "Estimated tsunami inundation area." Although I must admit, I felt a little more disconcerted at finding a Super Nintendo controller alongside a child's belongings. What happened to the owner? Did he manage to escape? Or wasn't he one of many fished out of the wreckage days later? I never found out. I didn't have the luxury of forgetting about what was going on in the Tohoku region. Having lived in Japan from 2006 to 2008, I had friends in Tokyo and elsewhere, and I felt strong ties to the country as my first experience living abroad. I had never known a people so giving and so friendly. And even if this hadn't been the case, I have a feeling there still would have been a drive for me to return to help, to see how those responsible were handling the situation, and to reconnect with the community. But as selfish as it sounds, the main reason I wanted to volunteer with Japan was to see the disaster area, to make it real for me. Don't get me wrong, I wanted to use whatever skills I could offer to help the Japanese people. I wanted to connect with a new volunteer organization. I wanted to make friends with locals and show them I cared. And I wanted to remove all the misconceptions the media had placed in my brain following March 11th. But my intention was to see the wrath of this tsunami with my own eyes. I'm getting a little ahead of myself, leaving more questions than answers. Just as every American has a story of where he was when the towers fell, so too does every Japanese remember where he was on 3/11/11. Not quite identifying myself as Japanese or completely American, I was working as an English teacher on the rural eastern coast of South Korea last year. By the time residents of Tokyo realized this was not a simple earthquake, I was in a classroom listening to 9-year-old Korean kids telling me they wanted the team name Golden Dragon. Golden Dragon. I didn't even learn about what had happened until I saw the news coverage playing over my butcher's head that evening as I stopped to pick up some pork for dinner. I was glued to the TV and internet for hours on end. Were my Japanese friends okay? Where had the tsunami hit? Was Tokyo safe? Was the Shinkansen, the high-speed train, still running? You knew things were serious if the train stopped running for a long time. With CNN shedding light on a volunteer organization I could join, I planned to visit. All Hands was fortunate to be one of the few foreign-run organizations allowed in so soon following the disaster, and I never saw them disappoint the people they helped. In their first few weeks, they found many homeowners and community leaders willing to let them clean the mud out of foundations and gut the first floors of homes and apartments to prepare for rebuilding. I never expected to see such a variety of damage, for lack of better words. On the Eastern Front, as I approached the Pacific, the scene was very much as had been described in the media. Roads covered in debris, nothing left to rebuild, the train tracks warped and torn from the embankment. Yet, at the fringe of this area, vending machines dispense cold Coca-Cola for 120 yen. A supermarket with glass display windows remained open for business, its parking lot looking spotless, its shelves fully stocked. The second floor of a new complex remained untouched, its appliances and fixtures looking like they had just been delivered from the hardware store. Farther and farther, the damage limited itself to cosmetic work. Storefronts and walls were marked by thick brown lines where the water had finally settled. I could have traced the depth all the way to the edge of town when it finally lowered to street level. Half of Ofunato was in shambles, the other half operating as though nothing had happened. Though that's not entirely true. There were emergency shelters. The volunteers and I were housed at a rehabilitation center with seniors and families on the north end of town. Many homes here were at a higher elevation, but convenience stores were open, classes were in session. You could even enjoy a beer and fresh sashimi at one of many izakaya, a common eatery in Japan. It wasn't as if the Japanese weren't pretending nothing had happened, far from it. The residents of Ofunato knew all too well it would be years until they would have their town back as they remembered it. Some who had lost everything and fled might never return. Children without homes, or for some parents, still had to study for exams. Yet locals like Kono-san greeted us with a smile on his face as we came each morning to rip out another piece of what once had been his proud home. Children I met in the rehabilitation center like Abigail, one lucky enough to escape her home with both parents before it was consumed by the waves, still found time to fret over exams and play Uno with our group after we came back from throwing pieces of what could have easily been her bedroom in our garbage bags. Everywhere, from bookstores in Tokyo to mini-marts in the small town of Ofunato, signs were hung encouraging Gambare Sendai, Gambare Nippon, Gambare Tohoku, Gambatte, as it's also known in Japanese. Keep your chin up. Don't let things that you can't control keep you down. Persevere. I've been carrying a certain numbness with me since my return from Japan. Similar to those feelings all must experience when faced with extreme poverty, or in this case, a calamity. I had the means to escape. I could have gone home if I'd wanted to. My surroundings after that week in Ofunato could only have been described as the complete antithesis of what I had seen. An air-conditioned classroom filled with children whose minds were focused on nothing more than playing English games. My stomach was full. The muscles in my legs were satisfied by a morning barefoot run. The streets were clean, the air was crisp. There was still a strong smell of fish in the air, but it was fresh from boats that were likely to never experience a tsunami. Think about what that week taught me about Japan and myself. During the 2 years I lived there, I found myself getting increasingly shaken whenever I was treated like an outsider. I was trying to make a life for myself there, but was still naive enough to believe I could be mistaken for anything but a foreign tourist. Volunteering in rural Japan wasn't about enjoying the best hot springs or taking pictures of shrines. This time, when I was on my early morning runs before taking the shuttle down to D-Mud, Kono-san's house, I encountered high school students in their freshly pressed Prussian-inspired uniforms, just as I had very much 5 years ago. This time, instead of shouting, "Hello, how are you?" at me from across crowded streets with no regard for discretion, those students greeted me in Japanese at a reasonable volume and delivered the appropriate bow for a youth respecting an elder. Ohayou gozaimasu. Even in the aftermath of the second greatest tragedy the country has ever known, locals were aware of the work in their town and made a conscious effort not to treat us as outsiders. There was social order and stability. It's one of the reasons I found myself so attracted to staying in Japan indefinitely. Despite all our differences, despite the risk of earthquakes, tsunamis, typhoons, I felt safer and more comfortable in those 2 years than I ever had in my life. Thank you.